Gather close, dear friends, and let your hearts be open. This is the story of a young girl named Amina, whose life was cursed because of jollof rice, changed by a single, tempting spoonful. In the heart of a vibrant village, where the rhythm of the drum speaks of joy and the shared pot speaks of community, lived a girl with a kind heart but a moment of weakness. A moment that invited a shadow to fall upon her. This is a powerful tale about a hunger that food could not satisfy, a shame that isolated a soul, and a forgiveness that seemed as distant as the farthest star. It's a story that asks us all, what would you do if your greatest mistake was written on your skin for all the world to see? For every young one listening, remember this: our actions, no matter how small, ripple out into the world, touching others in ways we cannot imagine. True strength is not in never falling, but in finding the courage to rise, to learn, and to seek redemption. Welcome to Echoes from the Baobab Tree, where the timeless spirit of Africa comes alive through the power of storytelling. Tales of love, betrayal, and redemption that echo through generations. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, kindly do so now, and don't forget to like, share, and join our growing family of story lovers. Now, let us begin the story. The most shocking part of the story, the part that would be whispered in markets and around cooking fires for years, happened on a bright Saturday afternoon during the New Yam festival in the village of Amoji. 12-year-old Amina stood frozen in the middle of the dancing and laughter, a single, terrified tear tracing a path through the fine coating of wood smoke on her cheek. Her mouth was open in a silent scream. Just moments before, she had been a happy girl, her belly full of the delicious jollof rice she had proudly helped to prepare. But now, a terrible curse had fallen upon her. It had started with a strange, cold feeling in her stomach, like she had swallowed a lump of the harmattan fog. Then, a voice, not her own, raspy and ancient, had spoken from her own throat, declaring to the entire village, "For your greed, you will always be hungry, but food will be your enemy." And as the words hung in the air, the most unbelievable thing began to happen. A faint, shimmering heat, like the air over a cooking pot, started to rise from her skin. A young child who had been standing near her, holding a roasted piece of yam, suddenly dropped it and began to cry. "It's hot. Amina is too hot." The crowd, which had been celebrating, fell into a stunned silence. The village chief, Elder Choku, dropped his gourd of palm wine. Amina's own mother, Neka, reached for her, but yelped and pulled her hand back as if she had touched a fire. Amina was radiating a terrible, scorching heat, and the delicious smell of the jollof rice that had been so inviting now made people feel sick. She was cursed. Cursed over a simple plate of jollof rice. How could such a terrible thing happen to a young girl? What greed was the ancient voice talking about? And what would become of Amina now, a girl who was a walking hunger, but whom no one could feed or even touch? Her future looked as bleak and as lonely as a dry riverbed in the hot season. But to understand how this tragedy came to be, we must go back to the beginning of that very day, when the sun was new and the world in Amoji was still full of promise. The morning had dawned with a golden light, and the air in Amoji village was thick with excitement and the mouth-watering smell of festival food. It was the New Yam festival, a time of thanksgiving, music, and most importantly, a time for a great feast. For 12-year-old Amina, it was her favorite day of the whole year. "Amina, wake up, sleepyhead," her mother, Neka, called from the cooking area outside their mud brick house. "The pots are already on the fire, and we have much to do." Amina jumped out of her sleeping mat, her heart beating with joy. She quickly tied her wrapper and rushed to help her mother. Today, she was finally old enough to help cook the festival jollof rice, a great honor. Neka was the best cook in Amoji, and her jollof rice was legendary. It was a dish of pure magic, long-grain rice turned a rich, red color by tomatoes and peppers, flavored with onions, thyme, and a secret blend of spices, with chunks of juicy meat and fish mixed in. "Amina, my good girl," Neka said, her face glowing in the heat from the fire. Today, you will learn the first secret of the great jollof. It is not just about the ingredients. It is about the love and the sharing. This pot, she said, pointing to the large, black iron pot sitting on 3 stones over the fire, is not for us alone. It is for the entire village. We cook with joy in our hearts, thinking of the happy bellies of our friends and family. Amina listened, but her eyes were fixed on the ingredients. There were plump, red tomatoes, fiery Scotch bonnet peppers, and big, brown onions. There was a bowl of pure, golden palm oil, and the precious long-grain rice soaking in water. And the meat. There was more meat in one bowl than her family usually ate in a whole month. Her stomach rumbled loudly. Neko laughed. I see a little hunger spirit has visited you already. Come, you can start by grinding the peppers and tomatoes. As Amina worked, grinding the ingredients into a smooth, red paste with her mother's old grinding stone, she couldn't stop thinking about the food. The smells were intoxicating. She watched her mother pour the golden palm oil into the big pot. It sizzled invitingly. Then, she added the sliced onions, and the air filled with a sweet, savory scent that made Amina's mouth water. When the tomato and pepper paste went in, the sizzle grew louder, and the color deepened to a beautiful, deep red. Neka added her secret spices, thyme, curry, and a few others Amina didn't know. The aroma became so powerful and delicious it felt like a physical thing, wrapping around Amina and pulling her closer to the pot. Now for the meat, Neka said, adding the chunks of beef and fish. They sizzled and browned in the rich, red sauce. Finally, she poured in the rice and the water, gave it one big stir, and covered the pot with a large banana leaf. Now, we wait. The fire and the pot will work their magic. The rice would drink up all the flavors and become something wonderful. The waiting was the hardest part. Amina was supposed to be fetching water for the other women, but she kept drifting back to the cooking area, drawn by the incredible smell that steamed from under the banana leaf. Her hunger grew and grew, turning from a little rumble into a roaring monster in her belly. She saw other children already eating roasted plantain and groundnuts, and she felt a pang of jealousy. Her mother was called away by the other women to help with the pounded yam. Amina, watch the pot for me, Neka instructed. Do not touch it. The rice needs to rest and absorb the steam. It is not ready yet. Amina nodded, but as soon as her mother was gone, she found herself standing alone before the bubbling pot. The banana cover lifted slightly with the steam, and a puff of that heavenly scent came out directly into her face. It was too much. The hunger monster in her stomach roared. Just one little taste, a sneaky voice inside her head whispered. No one will know. Mother said the secret is sharing, but she won't mind if I share just a little with myself first. Her eyes darted around. No one was looking. The whole village was busy with their own preparations. This was her chance. Her heart hammering in her chest, partly from fear and partly from excitement, she took a small calabash spoon. With a trembling hand, she lifted the edge of the banana leaf. A cloud of fragrant steam billowed out, and there it was, the most beautiful sight she had ever seen. The rice was a perfect, vibrant red, dotted with the brown meat and fish. It was almost ready. She leaned in, the spoon in her hand, ready to sneak a single, glorious mouthful. But just as the spoon was about to touch the rice, a shadow fell over her. She gasped and spun around, dropping the spoon into the dirt. It was not her mother. It was an old woman whom Amina had never seen before. She was so thin she looked like a walking stick, draped in a faded, threadbare wrapper. Her eyes were milky and deep-set, and her face was a map of wrinkles. She leaned heavily on a gnarled walking stick. The old woman looked from Amina's guilty face to the open pot, and then to the spoon on the ground. Her wise, old eyes saw the whole story. A deep sadness filled her gaze. "Child," the old woman said, her voice as dry and raspy as rustling leaves. I have walked from a far village, drawn by the smell of this great feast. My stomach is empty, and my bones are tired. I came to ask for a small share, for the kindness of a stranger. She paused, looking straight into Amina's soul. But I see that the greed in your own heart has come before the kindness of your village. You will steal a taste for yourself before offering a share to a hungry elder. Amina's face burned with shame. She wanted to explain, to apologize, to scoop a large portion for the old woman, but she was frozen, her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth. The old woman shook her head slowly, a gesture of profound disappointment. She raised her bony hand, not in anger, but in sorrow. You think only of your own hunger. So now, you will know a hunger like no other. You will carry this lesson with you, for all to see. And before Amina could even cry out, the old woman whispered a string of strange, ancient words that seemed to make the very air crackle. A cold chill, colder than the deepest well, passed through Amina's body, settling in the pit of her stomach. The old woman then turned and, without another word, disappeared into the crowd, leaving a terrified and ashamed Amina alone by the pot. For a few moments, nothing happened. Amina's heart was pounding. Was it a dream? A warning? She quickly covered the pot, her hands shaking. Maybe the old woman was just a strange beggar. Maybe the words meant nothing. Soon, her mother returned. Is everything all right, Amina? You look pale. Yes, Mama, Amina whispered, forcing a smile. The rice smells ready. And it was. When Neka lifted the banana leaf for the whole village to see, a great cheer went up. The jollof rice was perfect. It was served on big plantain leaves, and everyone gathered around, laughing and talking. Amina, her encounter with the old woman pushed to the back of her mind by the excitement, took a large portion for herself. She found a spot under the great iroko tree and began to eat. It was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. The rice was fluffy, the sauce was rich, and the meat was tender. She ate greedily, joyfully, forgetting everything else. But as she swallowed the last mouthful, the strange coldness in her stomach suddenly erupted. It was like a fire had been lit with that very food as its fuel. A wave of heat shot through her body, so intense it made her dizzy. She stumbled to her feet, and that's when she saw the villagers staring at her. That's when the raspy, ancient voice spoke from her mouth, cursing her for all to hear. The heat began to radiate from her skin, and the world she knew ended. Now, standing alone in the center of a shrinking circle of horrified villagers, with her own mother afraid to touch her, Amina felt a new kind of hunger awaken inside her. It was a deep, hollow, aching emptiness that the wonderful jollof rice had done nothing to fill. In fact, it felt even worse. The curse was real. And as the first wave of this new, terrible hunger gnawed at her insides, a single, scorching tear rolled down her cheek. The festival was over for her. Her life, as she knew it, was over. What would she do now? Where could she go? The terrifying heat from her own body was a prison, and the memory of the jollof rice was a cruel, cruel joke. The heat coming from Amina's body was not like the warm, comforting heat from a cooking fire. It was a dry, scorching heat, like the sun-baked earth in the middle of the dry season. The villagers of Amoji, who had been laughing and dancing just moments before, now backed away from her, their faces a mixture of fear and disbelief. Whispers, sharp as thorns, began to fly. She is cursed. What evil spirit has possessed her? Did you see how she burned little Kofi's hand? Amina stood frozen, the weight of their stares feeling heavier than a sack of yams. The terrible hunger in her stomach growled, a deep, empty ache that made her feel dizzy. But the thought of food, even the memory of the delicious jollof rice, now made her feel sick. The curse was already working. My child. My Amina. Her mother, Neka, cried out, her voice breaking with a mother's pain. She took a hesitant step forward, her arms outstretched, but the intense heat pushed her back. Tears streamed down her face, sizzling slightly as they fell onto the hot, dusty ground near her daughter's feet. "What has happened to you?" Elder Choco, the village chief, moved through the crowd, his face grim. He was an old man, his back slightly bent, but his eyes held the wisdom of many seasons. He held a long, carved staff, and he raised it now to quiet the murmuring villagers. "Silence," his voice boomed, cutting through the panic. He turned his gaze to Amina, not with anger, but with a deep, searching look. "Amina, daughter of Neka, speak. What did you do? And curse like this does not fall from a clear sky. It must have a root." Amina tried to speak, to explain about the old woman, but the words caught in her throat. Shame washed over her, hotter than the heat from her skin. How could she admit her greed to everyone? How could she tell them that she had tried to steal a taste of the festival rice, bringing this disaster upon herself and ruining the celebration for everyone? All she could do was sob, her whole body shaking. Just then, a young man named Chidi, who was known for his bravery and his strong arm as a farmer, stepped forward. He was tall and kind, and he had always had a soft spot for Amina, treating her like a little sister. "Elder," Chidi said, his voice steady. "We cannot leave her like this. Let me try. She is just a girl." Before anyone could stop him, Chidi strode towards Amina. He ignored the warning hit, his eyes fixed on her terrified face. "It's all right, little one. I will take you to your mother." He reached out and grabbed her arm. A scream, sharp and agonizing, ripped from Chidi's lips. He yanked his hand back, stumbling backwards. The smell of burned flesh filled the air. On his palm, clear and terrible, were the blistered marks of Amina's fingers. She had not even meant to grip him, her touch alone had seared his skin. A collective gasp went through the crowd. This was no trick. This was real, powerful magic of the worst kind. "She is a walking fire," someone shrieked. "She will burn down the whole village. She must leave. She cannot stay here." The shouts grew louder and angrier. Fear had turned into a dangerous mob. Stones were picked up from the ground. Amina saw the hatred in the eyes of people who had smiled at her that morning. Her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. "No!" Neka screamed, throwing herself between the crowd and her daughter. "You will not drive my child away. She is sick, she needs help." But the crowd was too frightened to listen. Elder Choco looked from the terrified girl to the angry villagers. He knew that fear was a more powerful chief than he was at that moment. With a heavy heart, he made a decision. "Amina," he said, his voice thick with sorrow. "For the safety of the village, you must go. You must leave Amoji." Neka wailed, falling to her knees. But Amina just stood there, numb. The hunger in her belly was a raging fire, and the heat from her skin was a cage. Her home, her family, her life, it was all being taken from her because of one foolish mistake. Where will she go? Neka cried, clutching the elder's feet. "She is just a child. She will die out there alone." Elder Choku's eyes were filled with tears. "There is a place, the old, abandoned hunter's hut at the edge of the dark forest. It is far from the village. She can stay there. We can leave food for her at the edge of the clearing." It was a sentence of exile. A life of loneliness. With the angry villagers watching, their eyes burning with fear and suspicion, Amina was forced to walk. Her mother, sobbing uncontrollably, packed a small gourd of water and a wrapped portion of the very jollof rice that had started it all. She placed it on the ground for Amina to pick up. But when Amina's fingers touched the plantain leaf wrapping, it blackened and smoked. The food inside sizzled and turned to ash in an instant. She could not even carry the food meant to save her. The walk to the edge of the village was the longest of Amina's life. People watched from their doorways, pulling their children inside as she passed. They closed their windows. They looked at her as if she were a monster. The shame was a poison in her veins, worse than the hunger, worse than the heat. She reached the path that led into the thick, looming dark forest. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches like skeletal fingers. She looked back only once. She saw her mother, held back by two other women, her body shaking with grief. She saw Chidi, cradling his burned hand, his face full of a pity that could not help her. She saw the home she loved, the place of music and laughter, now close to her forever. Turning away, Amina walked into the forest. The path was overgrown and dark. Thorny bushes snatched at her wrapper. Strange sounds echoed from the deep shadows. She was alone, truly and utterly alone. After what felt like hours, she found it, a small, dilapidated hut made of mud and sticks. The roof was half caved in, and spiders had made their homes in the corners. It was cold, dark, and smelled of damp earth and decay. This was to be her new home. Exhausted, heartbroken, and ravaged by the strange hunger that clawed at her insides, Amina collapsed just inside the doorway. The heat from her body seemed to make the very air in the hut shimmer. She called into a ball, the tears finally coming, hot and endless. She was the girl who was cursed over jollof rice. She was hungry, she was ashamed, and she was completely lost. For 3 days, this was her life. The terrible hunger was a constant, gnawing pain. Sometimes, villagers would come to the edge of the clearing, leaving a bowl of fruit or some roasted yam on a large, flat stone. But as soon as Amina, desperate and starving, would get close, the food would wither and rot before her eyes. A bunch of ripe bananas would turn black and mushy. A juicy mango would shrivel into a hard, dry stone. The curse would not let her eat. It was a torture designed by a cruel mind. She grew weaker and weaker. The heat from her body seemed to be the only thing keeping her alive, a terrible, burning energy that had nothing to do with food. She spent her days sitting in the doorway of the hut, watching the sunlight dapple the forest floor, feeling her life slowly fading away. Hope was a distant memory. On the 4th day, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in colors of fire, Amina heard a new sound. It wasn't the cautious footsteps of a villager leaving food. It was a soft, steady crunching of leaves, someone walking with purpose directly towards her hut. Her heart leaped into her throat. Was it an animal? A spirit? Or had the villagers finally decided to come and drive her even deeper into the forest? She scrambled back into the darkest corner of the hut, her body trembling. The footsteps came closer, and then a shadow fell across the doorway. A figure stood there, silhouetted against the dying light. It was the old woman. The same old woman from the festival. Her milky eyes found Amina in the gloom, and a slow, knowing smile spread across her wrinkled face. "So, child," the raspy voice said, cutting through the silence like a knife. "The hunger has been your teacher, I see. But your lessons are not over. You have only just begun to understand the price of your greed." Amina's blood ran cold, colder than the strange chill that had started the curse in her belly. She shrunk back against the muddy wall of the hut, trying to make herself as small as possible. The old woman's presence filled the tiny space, and the air itself seemed to grow heavy and still. "You," Amina whispered, her voice hoarse from thirst and disuse. "Please, please take it back. I am sorry. I am so sorry." The old woman stepped fully into the hut. She did not seem bothered by the heat radiating from Amina. In fact, she moved closer, her milky eyes studying the terrified girl as if she were an interesting insect. "Take it back," the woman rasped, a dry, crackling laugh escaping her lips. "A curse is not a borrowed wrapper, child. You cannot simply return it. It is a seed that was planted by your own actions. I merely gave it the water to grow." She leaned on her gnarled walking stick, her gaze sweeping over Amina's frail, trembling form. "The hunger teaches you what it feels like to want. To need. But you have only learned the first lesson. You still think only of your own pain. What else is there? Amina cried, despair making her bold. I am starving. I am burning. My family has thrown me out. What other lesson could there be? The old woman's smile vanished, replaced by a stern, unyielding expression. You took food that was meant for the community. You put your own desire before the shared joy of your people. Your healing, therefore, cannot come from taking. It must come from giving. Amina stared, confused. How could she give anything? She had nothing. She was nothing. I am called Ijeoma, the old woman said. And I have not come to remove your curse. I have come to show you how to live with it. The path to forgiveness is long, and it begins not with receiving, but with a single, selfless act. Ijeoma pointed a bony finger towards the doorway, in the direction of Amoji village. Tonight, a different hunger stalks your village. It is not the gentle hunger of a missed meal. It is the fierce, desperate hunger of a bushfire that cannot be stopped. A sickness has fallen upon the crops in the fields. The yams are rotting in the earth. The corn stalks are withering before the ears can form. The season of scarcity has come early, and it is a cruel one. Your people will soon know a hunger that mirrors your own. Amina's eyes widened. Her village was going hungry. Her mother. Her friends. A new kind of fear, one for others, pushed aside some of her own self-pity. What can I do? Amina asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ijeoma reached into a small pouch tied at her waist. She pulled out a single, ordinary-looking seed. It was small and brown, no bigger than a pebble. This is a seed of the udara tree, Ijeoma said, placing it on the floor of the hut. It is the only thing that will grow in the cursed soil of this forest clearing. It is the only thing that your touch will not destroy. Amina looked at the seed, then back at the old woman, not understanding. You will plant this seed, Ijeoma commanded. You will care for it. You will protect it. And when it bears fruit, you must offer that fruit to someone from your village. You must give them the food that you yourself cannot eat. This is the first step. But, it's just one seed, Amina said, her hope fading. One fruit cannot feed a whole village. Ijeoma's eyes seemed to gleam in the dark hut. You think too small, child. You still see the world through the eyes of the girl who wanted only one spoonful of rice. A single act of true kindness can be like a single raindrop in a dry season. It may seem small, but it can call the others to follow. Without another word, the old woman turned and walked out of the hut, melting back into the shadows of the dark forest as silently as she had arrived. Amina was alone again, but the emptiness felt different now. It was no longer filled just with her own pain, but with the news of her village's suffering. She crawled over to the seed and picked it up. It felt cool and smooth in her palm. It did not burn or wither. It was real. For the first time since the curse, Amina had a purpose. She found a sharp stone and used it to dig a small hole in the hard earth just outside the hut. The sun had set, and the moon was rising, casting a silvery light over the clearing. She placed the seed in the hole, covered it with soil, and then, unsure of what else to do, she placed her hot hands over the spot. A strange thing happened. The parched, dry soil under her palms seemed to darken with moisture. A tiny, green shoot, no bigger than her fingernail, pushed its way through the earth and unfurled two small leaves. Amina gasped and pulled her hands back. The little plant stopped growing, but it was alive. Her touch, which destroyed all other food, had given this one seed life. A new routine began for Amina. Every day, she would sit by the little Eudora plant. She would talk to it, for she had no one else to talk to. She would tell it about her dreams, her shame, and her fears for her village. And every time she placed her hands near it, the plant would grow. It was slow, but it was sure. The stem thickened and grew taller. More branches and leaves appeared. It was hard, grueling work. The hunger inside her was a constant, screaming companion. She was so weak that sometimes just walking to the stream to fetch water in a large leaf was a monumental task. She would often collapse on the way back, spilling most of the precious water. The heat from her body was relentless, and at night, she shivered with a cold that came from deep within her bones, a cold the external heat could not touch. Weeks turned into a month. The little plant was now a small tree, as tall as she was. And then, one morning, she saw it. Small, green, bulbous fruits beginning to form among the leaves. Eudora fruit. Her heart swelled with a feeling she had almost forgotten, hope. She tended to the fruits with all the care she had. She scared away birds with loud shouts. She carefully guided the branches so they would get more sun. These fruits were not for her. They were for her village. They were her chance, however small, to make things right. Finally, the day came when the fruits were ripe. They turned a beautiful, bright green, and when she gently tapped one, it felt firm and full of juice. There were 12 of them. 12 fruits for a hungry village. It was not enough, but it was a start. It was a selfless act. She carefully picked the fruits and placed them in a basket she had woven from strong vines. Her plan was to leave the basket at the edge of the clearing, where the villagers left her rotten offerings, with a note telling them it was safe to eat. But as she turned towards the path that led to the village, a terrifying sound shattered the forest peace. It was the sound of children screaming. Dropping her basket, Amina ran towards the sound, her weak legs protesting. She hid behind a large tree at the edge of the clearing and her heart stopped. 2 young children from her village, a boy and a girl she recognized, were in the clearing. They must have been searching for wild berries or edible roots, driven by the village's hunger. But they were not alone. Standing between them and the path back to the village was a massive, snarling wild boar. It was huge, with sharp, curved tusks and beady, angry eyes. It pawed at the ground, lowering its head to charge. The children were trapped, clutching each other and crying in sheer terror. The boar was going to kill them. Time seemed to slow down. Amina saw the terror in the children's eyes. It was little Obi, the blacksmith's son, and his friend, Zina. They were frozen, too scared to even scream anymore. The massive boar snorted, a cloud of steam puffing from its nostrils in the cool forest air. Its muscles coiled, ready to launch its heavy body forward and gore them with its sharp tusks. There was no time to think. There was no time for fear. Hey! Amina screamed, her voice raw and loud after weeks of silence. She burst out from behind the tree, running directly towards the boar. Her own weakness was forgotten, pushed aside by a surge of protective energy. The boar, startled by the sudden movement and the noise, turned its massive head towards her. Its beady eyes locked onto this new, shouting threat. Obi and Zina stared, their jaws hanging open. It was Amina. The cursed girl. The one their parents had told them to never, ever go near. She was glowing with a faint, shimmering heat, like the air over the cooking fire on a festival day. The boar, now enraged, decided Amina was the bigger problem. It let out an angry grunt and charged straight at her. Amina's mind raced. She couldn't fight it. She was just a skinny, starving girl. But she remembered the heat. The terrible, scorching heat that had burned Chidi's hand. It was a curse, but maybe, just for this moment, it could be her weapon. She stood her ground, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. As the boar thundered towards her, she didn't try to run. Instead, she dropped to her knees and thrust her hands out in front of her, palms facing the charging beast. It was a desperate, crazy gamble. The boar slammed into her. But its tusks never touched her. A sizzling, crackling sound filled the air, like meat dropped onto a red-hot griddle. The boar let out a high-pitched, agonized squeal. The smell of singed hair and burned flesh was overwhelming. It had run headfirst into the invisible, fiery shield of Amina's curse. It stumbled back, shaking its head in pain and confusion, a raw, red burn mark visible on its snout and forehead. It looked at the glowing girl, then back at the two children. With a final, frightened grunt, it turned and crashed back into the undergrowth, defeated. Silence returned to the clearing, broken only by the ragged gasps of the three children. Amina slowly lowered her hands. She felt dizzy and weak, the adrenaline fading. She looked at Obi and Zina, who were still clinging to each other, staring at her with wide, shocked eyes. They weren't running away. They were just staring. Are you both okay?" Amina asked, her voice trembling. They nodded, unable to speak. Just then, they heard voices shouting from the path. "Obi! Zina! Where are you?" A group of villagers, led by a frantic-looking Chidi, his bound hand still wrapped in a leaf bandage, burst into the clearing. They had heard the children's screams and the boar's angry squeals. They stopped dead in their tracks. The scene before them made no sense. Their missing children were safe, standing unharmed. And with them was Amina, the cursed girl, on her knees and looking paler than the moon. Chidi's eyes darted around, looking for the boar. He saw the trampled ground and caught a whiff of the burned smell. His gaze fell on Amina's hands, then traveled to the frightened faces of the children. "What happened here?" he demanded, his voice tight with confusion. Little Obi found his voice first. He pointed a shaking finger at Amina. "She saved us," he stammered. "The big pig was going to hurt us," and she shouted at it. It charged her and then it screamed and ran away. She made it go. The villagers murmured among themselves, their faces a mixture of disbelief and suspicion. How could a cursed girl, a girl who brought only sickness and fear, save anyone? Chidi walked over to Amina. He didn't reach out to touch her this time. He just looked at her, really looked at her. He saw how thin she had become. He saw the exhaustion etched on her young face. He saw the faint heat wave still rising from her skin. But he also saw no malice in her eyes. Only relief, and a deep, deep weariness. "Is this true, Amina?" Chidi asked, his voice softer now. Amina could only nod, her energy completely spent. Just then, Zina, who had been quiet, spoke up in a small voice. "She is not a monster," the little girl said, looking at the adults with a sudden boldness. "The monster was the pig. She is just hot." Her simple words hung in the air. The villagers were silent, their anger and fear suddenly confused by this new, unexpected reality. Amina remembered her purpose. The Eudora fruit. This was her chance. She forced herself to her feet, swaying slightly. "Wait," she whispered. "Please, wait here." She turned and hurried back towards her hut, her legs feeling like heavy logs. The villagers watched her go, too stunned to move. Chidi gestured for them to stay, his own mind reeling from what the children had said. Amina returned moments later, carrying a carefully woven vine basket. She walked slowly towards Chidi and placed the basket on the ground in front of him, keeping a safe distance. The old woman," Amina began, her voice gaining a little strength. "She said the village is hungry. She gave me a seed. My touch, it makes other food rot, but this grew for me. It is safe. Please, take it. It is for everyone." Chidi looked down into the basket. There, nestled on a bed of soft leaves, were 12 perfect, ripe Eudora fruits. Their bright green skin gleamed in the sunlight. They were the first fresh, healthy-looking food any of them had seen in weeks. A wave of emotion washed over Chidi's face. He looked from the fruits, to the safe children, to the frail, burning girl who had grown this gift for them even while she herself was starving. He slowly knelt down and picked up one of the eudora fruits. It was cool and firm in his hand. It did not wither. It did not rot. It was real, nourishing food. He looked at Amina, and for the first time since the curse, someone from her village looked at her not with fear or pity, but with something new. Something like respect. "Thank you, Amina," Chidi said, his voice thick with emotion. "For the children. And for this." He turned to the other villagers, holding up the fruit. "She saved our children. And she has brought us food when we have none." The villagers stared, their hard expressions beginning to soften. The evidence was right in front of them. The story the children told was not a lie. The gift of food was real. Perhaps they had been wrong. Perhaps there was more to the curse than they understood. But just as a fragile sense of peace began to settle over the clearing, a new voice, sharp and furious, cut through the air. "Do not touch that." Everyone turned. Standing at the edge of the path was Neka, Amina's mother. Her face was not soft with gratitude. It was twisted with a fresh, raw terror. She pointed a trembling finger at the basket of fruits. "It is a trick." Neka screamed, her eyes wild with fear for her daughter and her people. "Can you not see? She is cursed. Everything she touches is destroyed. That food is not a gift, it is poison. She is trying to poison you all." Neka's words landed like a thunderclap in the quiet clearing. The fragile hope that had begun to bloom in the villagers' hearts withered instantly, replaced by the old, familiar fear. They looked from the basket of beautiful fruits to Amina's heat-shimmering form, and doubt crept back into their eyes. "Mama, no!" Amina cried out, her voice breaking. "It is safe. I grew it for you. Please, you have to believe me." But Neka was beyond listening. The pain of losing her daughter, the shame of the curse, and the terror of seeing her near the village children had shattered her reason. All she could see was the curse, and she was certain it had twisted her daughter's heart. "Stay away from my child." Neka shrieked, this time at Chidi, as he still held the eudora fruit. "Throw it away. It's evil." Chidi looked on, his gaze shifting between the desperate mother and the fruit in his hand. The children, Obi and Zina, started to cry, confused by the sudden anger. Amina felt a despair so deep it seemed to swallow the sun. This was it. This was the end. Her own mother, the person who should have loved her most, had become the final wall between her and forgiveness. The hunger inside her roared, not just for food, but for an end to the pain. The heat from her skin flared, becoming so intense that the leaves on the nearby bushes began to curl and brown. "You see," Neka wailed, pointing at the withering leaves. "Even the forest dies where she stands. She brings only death." It was too much for Amina. The last of her strength left her. She fell to her knees, sobs racking her thin body. The heat around her pulsed like a dying star. "I only wanted to help," she whispered, her words meant for no one but the earth beneath her. "I only wanted to give back. I am so sorry for my greed. I am so sorry for everything." Her tears, scalding hot, fell onto the dry, packed earth. They did not sizzle away. Instead, they sank into the ground, darkening the soil. And as they fell, the most miraculous thing began to happen. Where her tears touched the earth, tiny green shoots pushed their way through the soil. Not just one or two, but dozens, then hundreds. They grew with impossible speed, unfurling into familiar, heart-shaped leaves. Eudora saplings. A whole forest of them, sprouting from the ground in a circle around her, watered by her tears of true, selfless sorrow. The villagers gasped, stumbling backwards. Neko's screams died in her throat, her hand frozen in midair. They watched, utterly spellbound, as the saplings grew into young trees, and then, before their very eyes, blossomed and bore fruit. The clearing was suddenly filled with the sweet, tiny scent of ripe eudora. The branches bent low, heavy with hundreds, thousands of the bright green fruits. It was a miracle. An undeniable, breathtaking miracle born from Amina's broken heart. In the stunned silence, a figure emerged from the forest. It was Ijeoma, the old woman. She walked slowly into the center of the clearing, her milky eyes taking in the grove of trees and the weeping girl at its center. She did not look at the villagers. Her gaze was only for Amina. "The curse is broken," Ijeoma announced, her raspy voice now soft, filled with a strange warmth. Amina looked up, her tear-filled eyes blurry. She felt a sudden shift inside her. The terrible, gnawing hunger that had been her constant companion simply vanished. The scorching heat that radiated from her skin cooled, fading away until her skin felt normal, warm with life, not with fire. She felt, "Oh. You have learned the final lesson," Ijeoma said, kneeling before her. "You have learned that the greatest hunger is not in the belly, but in the heart, the hunger for forgiveness, for love, and for a chance to make things right. You faced your shame. You offered a gift with no thought for yourself. And you wept not for your own pain, but for the pain you caused others. Your tears of true remorse have washed the curse away." Ijeoma then turned to the stunned villagers, her gaze finally settling on Nneka, who was now crying silent tears of her own. "The curse was never meant to destroy her," Ijeoma explained to them all. "It was meant to teach her. And perhaps, it was meant to teach you all as well. You were so quick to see a monster, you forgot to look for the child." Nneka let out a choked sob. The truth of the old woman's words crashed down on her. She saw her daughter, no longer glowing or dangerous, just a thin, tired, beautiful girl. She saw the incredible grove of food that had sprung from her daughter's tears. She saw the children her daughter had saved. All the fear and anger melted away, leaving only a mother's overwhelming love and a crushing guilt. "Amina!" Nneka cried, and this time, she ran forward. She did not hesitate. She fell to her knees and wrapped her arms around her daughter, pulling her into a tight, desperate embrace. Amina clung to her mother, burying her face in her neck. She breathed in the familiar, comforting smell of her mother, a smell of home, of safety, of love. It was a feeling more nourishing than any food in the world. "I am sorry, my daughter," Nneka whispered, her own tears falling onto Amina's hair. "I am so sorry. I failed you. Can you ever forgive me?" "There is nothing to forgive, Mama," Amina whispered back, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. "I love you." The villagers watched the reunion, their own eyes wet with tears. Chidi was the first to move. He walked to the nearest udara tree and picked a fruit. He took a bold bite. The juice was sweet and refreshing. It was the most delicious thing he had ever tasted. He smiled, a wide, genuine smile of relief and joy. "It is good," he announced to everyone. "It is a gift. A true gift." One by one, the villagers came forward. They did not approach Amina and Nneka, respecting their moment. Instead, they began to gently pick the udara fruits, filling their baskets and the folds of their wrappers. There was more than enough for everyone. The season of hunger was over. Elder Chaku stepped forward and bowed his head deeply to Ijeoma, and then to Amina. "The village of Amoji owes you a great debt, Amina," he said, his voice trembling with age and emotion. "You have saved our children and you have filled our bellies. But more than that, you have taught us a lesson about fear and forgiveness that we will never forget. Your home is waiting for you. You are, and always will be, one of us." As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the new grove of udara trees, the villagers, led by Chidi and the elder, started the walk back to Amoji. They walked with light steps and full baskets, their hearts lightened. Amina and Nneka walked hand in hand, following them home. Amina looked back only once, to see if Ijeoma was still there. But the old woman was gone. The clearing was empty, save for the thriving, fruit-laden trees, a permanent reminder of a curse that became a blessing. Amina turned her face towards the village, towards the lights that were beginning to twinkle in the twilight, towards the smell of evening meals cooking. She was going home. She was no longer the girl who was cursed. She was Amina, the girl who had faced her shame, the girl who had learned to forgive and be forgiven, the girl whose greatest hunger had finally been fed. Honestly, wasn't the old woman being too harsh on Amina? I mean, stealing a little food is a normal thing for a child to do. Shouldn't the mother have been cursed instead for not properly watching her daughter? What did you think? Let's know in the comment section below.